Welcome to ParadoxWalk Podcast, specializing in glitch in the matrix type things, anything strange, UFOs, cryptids, anything completely out of the ordinary that makes you think. Today's episode is in honor of my older brother's birthday. He was the first person close to me to openly talk about UFOs and belief in that type of phenomena. And my confession is I used to be a skeptic and roll my eyes at that sort of thing, and even maybe made some inappropriate, snarky comments at my older brother back then. But that all ended one day when I watched a UFO fly in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I was forced to call him up and apologize. So this episode is all for him. I have a crashed UFO story today where someone got very, very close to it, and he is believable in the sense that he's a military member. And another story about it. This sounds completely crazy, but that's why we do this podcast. A school janitor of an elementary school keeping a UFO inside the janitor's office. Can you believe that? So the first story here is one of the strangest things that anybody's ever heard of, but it's to me it's kind of believable. It's really, really freaky. This one's titled Bizarre Event in the Woods. I'm going to skip a little bit of it, but I'm mostly just going to read it word for word. For podcast sake, I'm going to cut out just some of the parts that are very detailed that we don't need for the story. So this is a lady and her husband working on something called English ivy. Early summer 2020, my husband and I have been isolating at home. Somehow we ended up crusading against the invasive English ivy that has steadily blanketed the parks and green belts of our Pacific Northwest country. For those unfamiliar with this devil weed, as she's calling it devil's weed. Actually, devil's weed is Jimson weed, which was the plant I talked about in, I think, episode 2 or 3. English ivy is basically a parasitical plant, twining itself around trees, telephone poles, buildings, anything that will aid its ruthless drive to climb higher. The ivy is very aggressive, starving the understory of sunlight and nutrients until entire parks are reduced to unsightly monoculture ivy deserts. She's a really good writer, huh? The weight of mature ivy plants is enough to topple trees already weakened by pollution and thereby posing a threat to urban forests. Over the last few years, there have been a concerted effort to remove the plants from public spaces, but after close to 1 million volunteer hours and many millions of dollars, only a small portion of the plants have been eradicated. Now, I've heard about that, like some types of plants that like cities get together and try to get rid of. I'm skipping ahead here. Just grow back no matter how much they spend on it. I'm going to go quote here. So, ivy removal is simple but hard work, while some mature vines boast feeders up to a foot wide with the hardness of a thick tree branch. These have to be cut by axe, handsaw, or hatchet and are a bitch to get through. The vines are also attached to the bark by a series of needle-like hairs, in which older plants worm themselves deep into the wood, making pulling the vine off of a tree difficult and potentially traumatic for the tree itself. This brings me finally to the glitch. Along an ivy-inundated trail, there is a fence with about 25 feet of very bushy, mature ivy. We had attempted twice to starve the majority of the plants. So she's talking about they went out there 2 times to try to kill this area of ivy. It's got about 25 feet of very bushy, mature ivy. We attempted twice to starve the majority of the plant by finding a place and hacking through the main feeder vine. This main feeder vine we took to calling the mother. Twice we had cut through layer after layer of small vines to locate, then sever monstrously huge feeders. Both times, however, there was no change in the mass of ivy. It remained stubbornly green and alive. We decided to have one last go at it. And after much hacking and sweating and colorful language, we located a massive snake-like mother woven around and through the fence posts like a fat and vaguely sinister anaconda. Something about it seemed so alien. The massive hairs poked out like endless line of lamprey teeth. The loops and whirls of those twined in every direction. A Georgian knot of thick and hardened vine. It seemed to almost ripple while we stared. A roided-out beast, flexing its unnatural muscles. I felt intimidated by a plant. I could tell my husband felt put off by the thing, too, standing uncharacteristically subdued and quiet at my side. Finally, he seemed to shake off his disquiet and pulled out his hatchet. He eyed the spot he would cut through, reared back and struck a hard blow. The very instant that the hatchet had cleaved into the mother, I heard a high-pitched shriek. that sounded like it came from the vine he had just cut into. The shriek was medium loud, lasted about 3 seconds, and sounded exactly like one would imagine a B-grade horror film sentient plant would sound if it were shrieking in pain. My husband dropped the hatchet as though scalded and looked at me in shock. We stared at each other for a few seconds silently. I don't think either of us wanted to be the first to admit what we had heard, but I eventually managed to ask him if he had heard that, to which he instantly responded, "It screamed at me." I'm a pretty grounded person. I've never in my 40-plus years experienced anything mysterious, anything that couldn't be explained through logic and critical thought. I've never seen an alien spacecraft or a ghost. Well, welcome to this podcast. Never had a dream that accurately predicted future events or heard my toddler discussing his days of doing the Charleston with this favorite dame. I guess she's talking about past lives or something. Oh wow, she goes here with it. I'm a firm atheist. I don't read my horoscope, and I have zero belief that my quartz mineral specimens are working subtle magic. Anyway, I don't know. She wants to explain it away or have somebody explain it, but no, it's the spirit. You guys heard the spirit of the plant. That's the answer. You hack into a big old plant like that, and that part of its spirit is gonna yell. You guys just heard it because that plant was so big. Something that seems odd to me is she goes on and on, like asking for someone to explain it. Like, can you make it so we didn't hear it? You know what I mean? She's almost like asking for somebody just to, I mean, her whole point of the story is that her and her husband, they agreed that they heard the thing scream. The guy literally says that to her, and he confirms it for her. And then she goes online begging for somebody to tell her it's something else. I don't get it. So, is it really that hard to believe? Like, if you took a hatchet and you chopped into an animal or something, it's gonna scream. Is it really that hard to believe that a plant has a spirit like that can feel something? I mean, to me, that's not like a far-fetched idea. I don't understand why someone. I mean, she's obviously intelligent. Look at how good she writes, and she literally says back and forth with her husband, and the husband said I think the words were, "It screamed at me," and she writes an entire article that the plant screamed at her. I think that's the name of the title of the article. So psychology of that just seems so odd to me. You hear something and you see something. That's what our eyes and ears are for. Why do we discredit ourselves? It's just odd. So this story here is going to be about UFOs. This is a Marine, Lance Corporal Jonathan Wygant. So the story goes like this. It starts off with him at his, he tells where he was trained, Camp Geiger, North Carolina. Then he got transferred. You know how in the military they get transferred all around. So they started him off as a Avenger gunner at Fort Bliss in Texas, surface-to-air missiles, trained in around 1996, 1997. He was transferred to Laser Strike, and then he was asked and sent to private perimeter security at a radar installation in Peru. Like, they asked him if he wanted that job, and he said yes. And they claimed that they were all there, so this unit was there to track. It was a radar installation to track drug aircraft going in and out of the area. At this point, I'm going to be kind of using a lot of his quotes. But what ended up happening is the superior said, "We have an aircraft that crashed, possibly friendly, and they need us to go there and secure the crash site." And that was at about 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night. And they were on like 12-hour shifts. So this is him talking here. Quote, "We went out in Humvees. We drove until you can't drive, like through, like thick jungle. We work our way through the bush to find the area that the craft went down." And he says it was easy to find the area because there was a huge part taken out of the trees. Like a big area was burned in a big path, like the trees were cut through, like a hot knife through butter, like something was on fire, and it was a lot of energy, like the trees were cut with like a laser or something very strange. His crew was the first to see the ship. The thing went up the hill and went up the ridge, and it was buried in the side of a cliff. And we walked up to the top of the rift, and there was a huge ship. Later, he estimates about 10 meters in width and about 20 meters in length. He called the shape like a mix of an egg with a teardrop. And he says, "I used to be into sci-fi movies, but this was like nothing I'd ever seen in a sci-fi movie. It scared me to see it, and it was confusing. We all climbed down, and it was buried at a 45-degree angle into the cliff, into the ridge. This is a steep cliff straight down, and it was dripping this syrup-like stuff of viscosity. It was dripping this liquid. It was everywhere. Purplish green color. It was on the plants and everything. This purplish green stuff. You look at it one time and then you look at it again and it kind of fluctuated. I don't know if it was alive or something, but it changed every time you looked at it. and you saw a different change of color. It was really strange. So the ship had like a hum to it from the ship. It made a sound like unplugging a guitar from an amp. A hum, a loud, deep buzz hum, and then it stopped. Except the colors and the shades didn't stop. The sound stopped. Then everything just seemed to stop. It was buried. I could see the back of it. I saw these vents, and I looked around to the other side, and maybe these vents were for propulsion, and this liquid was getting all over me. It was eating my camis just like an acid, and it got on my skin and ate some of the hair off of my arm. I saw the top hatch half open. I didn't see any lights, but it was half open, and I felt this presence. I think the creatures were calling me. It was weird. It was trying to communicate telepathically. I don't know. I don't really believe in this stuff, but I could hear it. It was terrible. It still comes and goes. Like if you sit in a car with the AM station on to but the noise turned up really high. I think he's talking about like static and the station kind of going in and out, but he wasn't really clear about that. The ship, it was really organic, and it looked like it was between an egg and a teardrop. It was like art. It didn't have any clunkiness or like something out of a shop. It looked like it was handmade like art. It was made out of like a metal, but it didn't have any reflection on it. I guarantee if I shined a flashlight on it, it wouldn't reflect. Nothing like I'd ever seen before. The creatures, I think, were crawling out for me to help them, and that everything would be all right. The superiors were sitting there hollering at us to get the heck out of there, and after we crawled back up, the DOD was there. I was arrested. All my gear was taken by men without name tags and black camis. They were older men in their 30s or late 40s, and we were the first people on the position. And then this government, they were there, and there was like a gap in the jungle that they landed a large plane with men in containment suits. When we climbed up, they were there. When we climbed up the cliff, when they climbed back up, the guys there in the black camis. So they tied my hands and legs in zip ties, and I was taken. I was taken in a CH-47, and they were cussing at me, and they were calling me a dumb a-hole, and why don't you effing people ever obey orders, and that now I'm dangerous, and if they let me go, that I would be dangerous, and I saw what I wasn't supposed to see, and I thought that they were going to kill me for a few days. And then there was this lieutenant colonel from the Air Force, and I don't think he identified himself. He just told me that I got to sign these papers and that he doesn't exist and that none of this ever happened. He was real abrasive, a real cynical guy, a real a-hole, you could say. They said that if they let me out in the jungle to die, that no one would ever find me. And I didn't want to test them on that. And he had me sign these papers that I didn't see anything. And they sent me to this installation. And I didn't go all the way in. I went in, I was segregated from other Air Force personnel for like 3 weeks. Other nations were there in this installation. The Chinese were there, and I think the Germans were there, all at this base. You could call it a cell for 15 hours, but it was more like an interrogation room. 15 hours with a light in my face, and they were yelling at me. I couldn't really identify the guys. And one of the guys that was there was the one in the black camis, and that he was there in the jungle. And he was saying all this stuff like growling these things like, what did you see? Earl Gurr, you're a patriot, right? You like the Constitution, huh? And I'm like, yeah. And then he says, well, we're on our own program. We don't obey. We do what we want out here. And they were really cursing in his face and telling him you didn't see anything, and we'll kill you and your whole family. For about 8 or 9 hours, they did that by taking breaks. One of the other things they said to him is that they'll take him up in a helicopter and throw him out. And this whole time I was handcuffed to the chair and I didn't move. I guess they scared the other guys too, as he talks about meeting up with the other guys and they didn't want to talk about it to him. But he wanted to tell a story, and he says there were life forms in that ship, and it was like someone was reading my mind. I felt a real presence. There wasn't much debris because it looked like it was just hit by a surface-to-air missile by target fragmentation. I guess a surface-to-air missile doesn't directly hit the target all the time. It just has to hit in the area, and it shoots all these things out like an explosion, like a shotgun. And it just has to get hit by something. So he says, I think the Peruvians shot it down because he heard that there were these craft flying in and out at Mach 10, and the radar is all cammied up, and the command bunker is located underneath the earth. It's like Star Wars in there. And there's these control panels that control the radar above ground, and all these controls, they're linked to other sites. It's really nice. And I had this guard duty, and these two girls start talking about these craft going in and out of the atmosphere. And my boss says that he says who it was. I didn't get that part, but he says that one of the bosses says that I want those logs, and these logs have all these codes and these objects